And that was Enter Sandman by Metallica. You're on hour 2 of The Velocity of Now with Thomas Sheridan. I've got Steve and Nick and Kira here as well, and we're shooting the breeze about whatever comes to mind. But it's been an interesting show tonight. And anyone else wants to come along, call in. You know, it's an open forum. I'm not opposed to like having a nice little chinwag here. So if you want to call in, you can do that, or you can click the Skype button in the upper corner of the page. And this is, again, the second hour. The first hour flew there. I'm Thomas Sheridan. And we've been talking about lots of things in general. And Fi is here as well, so we have a nice little thingy. Now, before I go on to the next bit, I want Steve to come on and tell me about something he was telling me off air beforehand about what grasshoppers or crickets, I think he said, sound like slowed down. What's the story on that, Nick? Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, it's a composer called Jim Wilson. This is from a website called thetruthseekerdaily.com, which is a lovely title, I'm sure you will agree. But yeah, this guy, Jim Wilson, recorded the sounds of crickets, and then he slowed them down. It doesn't actually say how much he slowed them down by. And unfortunately, we can't really play out the sound over because it won't come out over the Blog Talk recording. So, but I have heard it, and it is absolutely hauntingly, amazingly angelic, and it's all in perfect harmony, and it's all got some kind of the rhythm that crickets have naturally. Well, when that's slowed down, it's a really ambient kind of beat, and it just sounds like if you've ever heard a choir in a cathedral or something with the acoustics are really good. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's just amazing. So what you've been saying before about when they used to film, was it John Huston used to film his stuff in colour then print it in black and white?
Yeah.
Well, it's going to get the same quality to it, hasn't it? Because crickets obviously live their lives faster than we do. They have a shorter lifespan.
Yeah.
So. And if you augment that back down to our speed, that's what they're actually singing. They're actually having a good old choral choir to each other.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The human brain operates at a clock speed that will be quite different than the clock speed of other species. We don't know how, for instance, how birds actually hear bird song or cats hear another cat's meow. Their brain may operate at a different clock speed than ours, where they actually are hearing much more complex sounds and complex tones. You said ambient. And that brings me to the next section, because this week I've been doing a little bit of sorcery. I found an object that I made, must be nearly 20 years ago, after I went to a lecture that was given by, I don't remember if it was an EMI or RCA former engineer, who spoke about that the early development of radio was initially driven by the need to contact the spirit world. This is what really drove the technology, and this is how they started to use crystals and so on. Now, I have this I've read a very crude sort of rehash of what was called a Tesla spirit radio. Tesla in 1901 created this device in his laboratory, and it so frightened him that he thought he was hearing voices from other worlds or other dimensions. And so I tried this years ago in a pre-digital age. I got a jar, I think it was a pasta jar, dried pasta jar, and I ran a copper coil down from 2 holes in the top, and I connected that to, originally it was connected to an American lamp holder, but it's now got a British and Irish lamp holder on it, a bayonet lamp holder. And the reason why I could do that was I could do 2 things. I could hook up an oscilloscope to it to see if it would give me a reading on an oscilloscope, and also to hook up a voltmeter on it so I could see if it was actually generating voltage. In both cases it did, and it still does. Now the crystal does have it's a piece of milk quartz that I found myself, and I shaped it. For some reason the quartz has to be tapered on both ends, and the coil wraps around it 3 times. I will make a proper YouTube video about this stuff and put it up because it is fascinating. The jar has a wooden top and it's sealed with wax. The wax decayed over the years, and I put new wax back into it. And it's also got a very high quality microphone inserted into it. The microphone, I think it's either a Shure or a Sony mono microphone, and it's in the jar, recording any kind of ambient sound that's created by this crystal in the jar. Now, years ago, I hooked it up to a cassette because I didn't have a cassette recorder, but I had a very, very good quality Tascam cassette recorder. I recorded the sounds with the microphone. At the same time, I was taking readings with the oscilloscope, because I had access to an oscilloscope back then, and I had the voltmeter, and it was showing a small amount of voltage. It was giving a reading on the oscilloscope. I've studied electronic engineering in college, so I know a bit about how electronics work, and it was giving an audio sound on the cassette recorder, which I was actually bringing into. It was one of these cassette recorders where you could put one cassette recorder in and record from that, but you were able to actually bump up the levels. So I was able to actually greatly increase the levels, so I could hear the sound that wasn't really audible to the human ear. Now I can just plug the microphone directly into a program like Audacity and hear the sound very, very clearly and amplified in a very much more natural and less crude way. And I have to say, I've been posting this stuff to my Facebook pages, and I've been doing this stuff late at night myself, and probably not a good idea. But it's very, very odd. There's no ambient background noise where this thing is located. I've even tried doing it without the computer. I plugged it directly into a Zoom recorder and ran the recording lead a good 10 feet away from it, so it's not picking up any ambient noise. And it genuinely sounds like there is a conversation going on in there, coupled with shall we say, a kind of a feedback, which might be some kind of piezoelectric effect caused by the crystal. But whatever making these sounds and these noises are inside the actual jar. Now, I've started, I'm not going to say anything. It could be the same kind. It sounds very similar to a lot of the noises that that were picked up by radio telescopes, but it does, at the same time, it doesn't. Now, I'm going to conduct some proper experiments, because I'm an old-fashioned natural philosopher, and I like the idea of conducting hands-on experiments. I'm going to put it in a metal box that'll be grounded to that'll be completely shielded and grounded to the earth or the ground in the house, the electrical system, to make sure that there's no exterior noise coming in there, interference. And I know there isn't. It's just so I can prove to other people the sounds originating in the jar. Now, what has been making this very interesting is that I've been trying different things. Shall we say I've been taking it in kind of more magical places. And I'll just put the basic sound on Facebook so people can see that, and I slowed it down to 50%, and another friend of mine took it and reversed it and put it and slowed it down even further, and it sounds more and more like conversation. It's a measured, quantified tone. Now, if it's picking up something from somewhere else, or there's some kind of recording aspect to this where previous conversations and sounds were recorded into this crystal, I don't know. I just don't know. Is it picking up voices from other dimensions or beings from other worlds? I don't know. But it's very, very strange, and it ties in exactly what Steve was saying. People say, well, it's cheating if you're slowing it down. No, I'm not. The noises are already there. They exist, and they're coming from inside this jar. And by slowing them down, I may be slowing them down to a clock speed that my brain can comprehend them, because the clock speed of our brains are not the same as an ant, they're not the same as a bee, they're not the same as a bat, and they're not the same as a bird. So it's not cheating. It's compensating for actual neural perception differences, because we don't, the brain has an actual clock speed. So that was interesting enough, but then it got very, very spooky. In real time, I took the lid off the off the jar, and I placed a sigil in there. If you don't know what a sigil is, it's a statement or an expression or a desire which is to the vowels and with the vowels removed, the repeating letters removed, and then put into a graphical form. When I put that in there, the sound, the pitch and the tone changed. It became much more rapid. Now, was I causing this? Was my concentration on the sigil actually causing this to generate this sound on this crystal? Possible. I don't know. It did affect it. Then I started experimenting with other things. I put in an English coin with the Queen's face on it, and the sound changed to a much more aggressive tone. I can't explain it. That's what happened. Yes, the coin is made of metal. It was an English £1 coin. Freaky. I put the euro in, and I put some Norwegian kroners in, and they all had different sounds where you turned them over. And then the weirdest one of all was I started talking to it. Oh, another thing that happened was I shined the light on it, and the pitch would change, and the tones would change, and the sounds would change. And so, as the natural progress from that point would be to ask it questions. And so I would go over to the jar, and I would ask a question: is there somebody in there? And you would hear my voice like that kind of thing. The thing would go silent, and then suddenly it would answer. It would go quiet as if it was listening to the question in a different speed. Or I'd shut the sound off of my brain. I don't know. I can't explain it. But it was very spooky and very odd that I was actually appeared to be able to have a dialogue with this thing. One more aspect as well is that for some reason, I can't explain it, there is an intermittent bass thud that happens every so often. These bass thuds can be two together, one together, but there's no actual rhythm to it. I'm not sure if these are actually earth tremors being picked up by it, because the more I've worked on this thing, the more I realize, as crude as this device is, it's probably one of the most sensitive piece of equipment I've ever had in my possession in my life. It seems it's like it's even more sensitive than many sort of high-tech electronic instruments used to measure everything from piezoelectric effect to the Geiger counter. It's just a piece of rock with a coil around it, but yet the thing seems to be having an incredible, powerful effect in itself. I'm not convinced there's anything in the jar, or if there's some, like I have two Muslim friends, and they tell me that the jinn are real, and the jinn is arch thunders. That the jinn are behind everything from aliens to seeing UFOs to tulpas to ghosts to poltergeists. The aliens are all there. They're all there. Now, they're convinced that these are the jinn. That's what they're telling me. No, you shouldn't be asking that. The jinn are in the jar. You've actually got the genie in the bottle. Do I have the genie in the bottle? It's a terrifying idea if it's true. But I was reading up on the Lesser Key of Solomon that one of the ways Solomon used to catch demons was to put a sigil into a box and then trick them into the box because they would actually be attracted to it. And we know that money is all sigils. So I'm probably experimenting with things that could be quite dangerous, but I'm pretty grounded about a lot of this stuff. I'm pretty grounded about. I don't run out and say I've contacted a demon or I've captured a demon or seen something. But this is just proof for me that magic is real. And people who say magic isn't real, they're fools, because it is real. Now, it's not supernatural, it's not spooky. There are things you can do and certain steps you can do to actually create change. When I say change, I mean anything. It could be anything, but it's someone's consciousness and their perceptions, or it could be to actually change your own understanding or your own kind of maybe cynicism regarding something. And this thing has got me. It's got me interested. It's got me looking at things now in a very kind of spooky way. I mean, I'm probably unique in this field. I don't think any people do things like this live. Again, because you get these bloody Christian shooters that go, yeah, he's messing with the devil. He's messing with the devil. Oh, all kind of crap. No, I'm not. I'm actually interested in. This is science. This is natural philosophy. This is what I'm about. And I'm interested because I know for a fact, if you've seen any of my paintings, my talks live, that I know that that art itself has a magical quality, and this is why every culture has it. It brings certain things into well, shall we say, manifestation. And this seems to be a natural extension of my interest in this. So, does anybody in the chat room have an opinion about this?
Yeah, I can't remember if we were talking on air last night about this, or if it was the sort of after chat we had about this chap called Heinrich Gessler, and he was the German guy in 1855 and who sort of invented the first version of what would become the cathode ray tube, and he invented it to talk to the spirit world. Do you remember talking about that last night?
Yeah, very well. And I was aware of that. I couldn't remember his name.
Mm-hmm.
But the cathode ray tube, if you actually think in terms of it, it's not. It's more like, and the same with the old, the old valves that they used to have in guitar amps.
Mm-hmm.
The old vacuum tubes.
Yeah.
They're the similar kind of thing. They're closer to like an alchemical vessel than they are to an electronic device.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of the way they work. Now, a cathode ray tube on its side is just electrons. Well, it's not just, it's quite incredible. Yeah. It generates an incredibly high voltage that there's actually, this would make TV repair actually quite a hazard and dangerous. Dangerous work. I remember we were stressed. This was stressed to us when I was in college, that like at the back of the cathode ray tube there's like 70,000 volts on a European TV, and this was to fire the gun to shoot the electrons at the screen. I believe the first successful transmission of the cathode ray tube, the first ever symbols ever fired, was either a swastika or a pentagram.
It was a pentagram, I think.
It was a pentagram, yeah.
Well, was it 1855? This guy Heinrich Gessler sort of invented this thing, and he invented it with a mercury pump. So you can imagine how toxic that was, and it was it created a vacuum basically, which meant things could go backwards, I guess. And then sort of William Crookes sort of invented the Crookes tube after that. So it kind of evolved through Germany through to England, then to Carl Ferdinand Braun invents the what's now known as the cathode ray tube. And some Russian guy also, no, it was a Russian guy actually, Vladimir Kozmosky, is it? And he invented the cathode ray tube, but its initial invention was to reach the other side.
And that's what this engineer that I went to the lecture said.
They weren't trying to invent television, they were trying to invent something that could talk.
Yeah, and the Edison was even like these hard-nosed scientists like Edison was involved in this. Who was the guy who wrote the Sherlock Holmes books?
Conan Doyle.
Conan Doyle was actually plowing lots of money into this. And I saw like one of the diagrams he showed was a kind of a like something what I have, a jar, and it had a piece of it was almost like a cathode and an anode made of two pieces of copper foil. And when they would ask questions, they would get almost like a Morse code tapping back out to specific answers to questions. I mean, this is hardcore occult stuff, and yet this is what drove technology. And yet people claim that like these people say, "I'm a scientist. I practice reason. I don't believe in any of this supernatural stuff." The reality is that most of their cherished scientific developments, even early into the 20th century, were based on these ideas of actually being in communication with supernatural beings.
Well, the native perspective would say that the rocks are alive. We call them the rock people or the rock nation. So what we're actually conditioned to think of as life, is something that would rule out a rock as being a living thing.
Yeah,
but
they'd have a consciousness.
Native wisdom. Yeah, but native wisdom teaches that like when we have a sweat lodge and the rocks come in, the rocks are heated under a fire, and when the rocks come in... Oh, that's interesting about a sweat lodge and the rocks. I never thought about that. But yeah. you would actually have that. You only think of the rocks as being hot. Mm-hmm.
But it's also like when you look at like the work that's been put on everybody by even the Freemasons to shape rocks into specific shapes is almost like tuning an antenna.
Yeah. And I think those megalithic sites were made with frequency, with sound, that they were able to do things that we don't understand today because they had more knowledge of sound frequencies and how they work and how they can move things with sound.
Oh, I totally agree. And if you go to a place like Avebury in England, you're struck by the fact that this is a machine.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, you know, back in the day, back in the time of the Vedas of India, mantras were used as weapons. It's only the manipulation of vibrational frequency. All potential lies in the correct utilization of vibrational frequency.
So, Swami, welcome, by the way, you would say that the actual way, the tonal quality of the mantra could actually, like, knock a person over or split a rock, that kind of thing?
Any number of things can be done. Yes. You know, like in that, what was the movie about Gurdjieff?
People, meetings with impressive men?
Something along that line. But they show this competition between humans attempting to generate the proper frequency that will have a certain effect on the natural structures around them. And this was very well understood once upon a time, and it's understood today by those, you know, in the dark circles and things. But everything is alive. It's not alive in the way we think of the human body being alive, but it is alive in its own way, at its own frequency of existence. Everything is part of the one thing which gave life to all things, both seen and unseen.
In the Islamic world, and my Muslim friends have told me this, they do not listen to Western pop music because they say the mastering process, that the actual master is a jinn that's been put into the final mix.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've heard that thing about David Crosby being asked about, do they still take the master recordings to the temple room?
Yeah, that was the White Stripes there. While Thomas was going to get a cup of coffee.
An immensely profound statement. The truth doesn't make a noise, because anything that is a noise is only a portion of the truth.
And it's just a noise.
An echo.
A buzz.
Right. I mean, apply any term that seems to fit the circumstances, but the entirety is the truth. Anything separated or isolated from the entirety then becomes what is referred to in the ancient traditions I represent as the Maya. Sometimes they use the word illusion, but that doesn't mean that it's not there or that it's not real. It just means it's temporary and limited in its scope.
Exactly, yeah. I wanted to make a small point earlier when Thomas was talking about his kind of inventions and the crossover between spirituality and science. And you're all aware of David Talbot and Wallace Thornhill, I believe. And they said that the sooner that
that science relates to spirituality.
Yeah. What in the world though? Great. No, he said the sooner mysticism is brought into the world of physics, the better, because we're all doomed unless we don't.
Right, that is the eternal science.
Can you hear me now, guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the microphone, I don't know what happened. I'm just using it back on the regular mic now. Yeah, I don't know what happened to the mic then. Before we went to the break, or the song, Swami, you were saying about, and I heard the other guys were talking about it too, tell me about this mastering process that was basically confirming what my Muslim friends were saying, that there is some spooky goings on in the record companies regarding this mastering process.
Steve, why don't you roll with that? You were starting to add some flesh to the bones that I set out there.
It's a fella by the name of John Todd, who I don't know if you're familiar with his name, but he's an occultist, and he was basically at Illuminati school with David Crosby and all these, because he's like our friend Jay Parker, he was part of that world, and he's got an amazing sort of you can find his talks on YouTube and stuff like that, but he wrote an amazing book.
I think I heard about this guy. He's on the run or something.
He was on the run. I mean, he died. He was suicided in 2007.
Right.
He was known as John Todd Collins or Lance Collins.
But his cassette tapes got passed around.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yeah, he has a big moustache, a black and white photograph of him.
That's right, yeah. He's a big...
I've heard of the guy.
Yeah, basically he released the sort of bombshell that everybody at Atlantic Records, which was the big, label of the day, which had the Led Zeppelin and all that lots of things. So from the sort of hippie scene, 67 onwards, like more or less all Asylum Records and all, like, the David Geffen associated stuff was all taken to this place in Los Angeles, where they were mastered, and there were ceremonies done over the master tapes basically, and then sent out into the world. And if you've ever read Philip K. Dick's Radio Free Album or heard of it, that's basically what that whole novel is about, but putting subliminal sigils into music.
And that makes sense with Atlantic as well, because Led Zeppelin had nothing but sigils on there.
Absolutely, yeah. Well,
the lyrics were kind of like they were definitely esoteric.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing for sure. I mean, and if you really look at Led Zeppelin, all they are is a blues band basically.
Yeah, they're
had phenomenal success. I mean, they sold, Beatles-esque amounts of records, sort of thing. And, there's another name you can do.
Their success was way out of proportion to their ability, I always thought.
Yeah, well, they were a good band, there's no denying that. But
but there was bands at the time that were better, that didn't have...
Absolutely. Like I just said, they were just a blues band, really.
Like Deep Purple.
Well, in Robert Plant's life, I mean, that guy has been through hell.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a price that gets paid by anyone who stands at the point of using these technologies, these spiritual technologies and stuff. No one gets anything for free.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't one of Led Zeppelin buy that Aleister Crowley place?
Jimmy Page owns it.
Jimmy Page owned it till about 10 years ago.
Yeah, Boleskine Manor on the Loch Ness up in Scotland there.
Mm-hmm.
I have my own theory about the Loch Ness monster. I think actually that it appeared after Crowley was doing the Abamelin there, the 6-month ritual. I think Crowley may have actually created that disturbance in the lake. Yeah,
the story of that is he never completed that.
He came back after 3 months.
Yeah, because he went off to Paris to be with his mentor, who was in financial and sort of in health problems. And that's the biggest no-no in black magic, is to leave something half done.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, and it was right after that the first photographs came out, the first massive substance. There's almost no reports of the Loch Ness monster prior to that. And people say, oh, well, there's a poem from the 11th century about a saint exorcising a lake. Every single lake on these islands had a monster, and that was exorcised by some saint, even though they're over me. So that was not an unusual story for a story of a saint exorcising a lake. It took place all over Europe. The Loch Ness monster was absolutely, in my opinion, as crazy as it sounds, a disturbance or a tulpa or something like that created by Crowley, and it remains in the lake to this day. I'm absolutely convinced of it.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Well, the Abamelin, the ritual that he was performing at Boleskine Manor, that was literally to open up the gates of hell. That's how he described it, if it was successful.
Yeah. Well, if he created a porthole, it could be some sort of time distortion and from the dinosaur age.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? There was those amazing photographs in the 70s that have never been debunked, and it looks like the flipper of one of those, those Simon, those
plesiosaur.
Yeah, one of those guys, and it was picked up on the earliest version of sonogram, because the lake itself was jet black. Right. There's no visibility in it because of all the peat. But it's interesting. I think there's, to me, and you see, and then there's so much, on Sgt. Pepper's, isn't Crowley on the cover of that as well?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it seems to me that the music industry was infused with this occultism, big time. So it would make perfect sense to me that they were doing things like what David Crosby said.
Well, our good friend Freeman, who'll be joining us next week in the lounge, often says that Crowley invented the 20th century.
Oh, he definitely did.
He's...
he invented the 60s anyway. Well, the Aeon of Horus, that was his whole idea, was to bring in the Aeon of Horus.
Mm-hmm.
And it literally began right after he died. You had, right after he died, then you had the emergence of Jack Kerouac and the Beat Poets and, William S. Burroughs and all these types that were the new kind of way of thinking, not just in the Americas, but all over the world. The whole system started to regurgitate, bubble up from the bottom in a very different kind of way. I was, it's back to the music again. I was even thinking about that band Kiss. Do you remember that their logo was two runes? Their logo was basically runes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, do you know what Kiss stands for?
Knights and Satanic Service. Is that true?
Knights and Satan Service. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know that they've ever copped to that, but that's one of the popular
Gene Simmons like that slept one time.
And if you take away all their flash in the pan, all their kind of the makeup and everything, like you said, they're an average glam rock band like Slade.
Right.
Well, they're not even as good as Slade.
Well, they took away their makeup once, didn't they? No one bought the record, so they went straight back to wearing it again.
Yeah, Unmasked was the name of it.
What you know.
What's that?
Stick with what you know.
Yeah. And I saw a recent video of them performing in Switzerland or somewhere, and the stage show is just unbelievably more occult than ever. They come off a giant spider, and they kind of come down from the clouds like it's almost like a god kind of thing, and arrive on the stage. And it's the usual Kiss show they've been doing since the 70s.
Right.
But it looks to watch the show, it looks like a mass. It looks like a ritual.
I saw a really disturbing program with Gene Simmons once. It was really bizarre. It was a little bit like that film that Jack Black was in, Rock School.
Yeah.
It was
actually called Rock School.
Was it called Rock School, that program? It was a really bizarre scenario. Yeah, they had this public school with these really lovely, fresh-faced young boys.
Yeah, autists and...
yes, they were all terribly good musicians. And then Gene Simmons was...
Oh, I've seen that, yeah, I've seen that.
And he was...
The deal was they had to write a metal song and open up for Motorhead, the Hammersmithodian.
Which they did.
Which they
did.
They were all from the same town, Lowerscroft, wherever that is.
No, that was a different one, Thomas. This was Horsham. That was the working class version of it.
Oh, I didn't know there was a second one. That's interesting.
Oh no, the original one was these posh kids at a public school, like a prep school.
Yeah, and they all wore robes and...
Yeah, they all wore half-mast sort of with stockings rolled over the breeches and stuff like that, and wore little bowler hats or little boater hats. Proper, it wasn't Eton. It was definitely in Horsham, but it was a school like Charterhouse or something. And
one of those freaky places. Yeah,
they turned these sort of etheric angels into devils. It was quite bizarre thinking about it now, because that was like a good, it was a good while ago. Was it 10 years ago, wasn't it? Almost.
Well, they're blowing the whistle when they do this kind of stuff, because they're actually showing you what they're doing to us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there you go.
It's like we were saying on the show, I think it was last week, that they have to actually warn you of the...
No, they have to tell you what they're doing. Yeah.
And you have to acquiesce by accepting it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you can't say you fooled me, because you weren't tricked, you accepted.
Right, they can always stand back and go, oh, but we told you, you just didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, the ultimate example of that to me would be Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. He wrote on every page that what he was going to do, and so people couldn't turn around and say, you didn't do it. Yeah. We didn't know. How could you? He wrote it out in 1924 what it was going to do, and it all came to pass.
The bigger lie you tell, the more people will believe it, or something. He said.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Mein Kampf was that it would sound in English bombastic and crazy and over the top and the ravings of an unstable mind, but it wasn't meant to be read in English. It was meant to be read in German. And when you read it in German, it came across very differently. It translates almost as a kind of an epic, and the reader was transformed into a kind of a Grail mystery saga. And this was a big mistake that the Allies and the British made. They were laughing at him for years, saying that book was obviously the mind of a lunatic, written by the mind of a lunatic. But he wasn't. He was writing in terms of Germanic sort of like mythological sorcery, and playing on all these archetypes of the sort of Germanic consciousness, of the Teutonic consciousness. This is why the SS used runes and all this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And when by 1938, when they realized that this guy is fucking serious, they finally, in the British Secret Service, got down to start reading Mein Kampf in Germany, and it was like a nervous. They literally had a nervous breakdown, because by reading it in German, they assumed the consciousness of the people that the book was targeted at. And it dawned on him this was actually a text to actually spellbind people into following a kind of a black magic religion, and that way they couldn't, even like people after the war said, well, we couldn't say that Hitler didn't tell us he was going to do it. He did it. He told us, and that's all part of the same thing. And when you listen to like music, so much of the music, the lyrics particularly, are telling us what's coming.
One of the things that I have to put a fair amount of energy into when I'm working with people, English-speaking people now, talking about things from the Vedas and the ancient past and the mantras and things, is that I have to get through to them that although an English translation exists, that your mind understands, that is not the totality of what these mantras are and do.
Precisely. You cannot. I even know that from Irish. When you conceptualize something in Irish, it's very different than in English. That's why a lot of languages do not change. And English was actually a bastard language anyway. It was changed during the Elizabethan era to make mercantile things and business operate more effectively. But even that was a consciousness of the business classes. That wasn't even a magical spell itself. That's why people like John Dee were so heavily involved in it. Yeah. The idea was to generate a new language that would make the people behave and think in certain ways. So it's like people who grow up speaking English are so far connected from any kind of native or ancient linguistic understanding that we don't really necessarily understand the power of language in the way you said, Swami, the Vedas, or even the way the Germans understood it. And it's like, I often think if we were really going to take them on, the psychopaths in power, it's almost like we have to create our own, not only our own media, but maybe even our own languages and ways of using words and ways of talking that will actually undo the spell, at the same time subvert their power over us.
You getting back to Pilatus then?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Back to Pilatus then, Thomas.
Yeah, the Polari. The idea like that's what the gay guys on the ships used to do. And it came off that onto the land, and they would talk in Polari. And it was a way became their secret language to keep them safe, but also to network. And it's almost that we need something like that. We need to develop our own syntax and our own kind of linguistic codes and that kind of thing, in order to deprogram us from the system. Because especially since the thing of epigenetics has come along, people are now fully aware. It's now been shown that your actual thoughts can change your genetic sequences. They can switch on certain genetics, and that's why I was talking to Kira last week about they're pushing this warrior gene bullshit in order to sort of say psychopaths are in the genes and they have a warrior gene. They're actually trying to, they may actually be attempting to switch on this dormant or this non-existent gene sequence, to actually switch this gene on, to create a situation where we think that our leaders have to be psychopaths, and we admire what's in them. And because we have a language that's a very corrupted language and a very young language, this is one I think we have to be very careful about, is buying into their spells. And the term spell, you know where that comes from? To cut into the rune. When they would cut the cut the rune into the stone, that actual expression was called to spelt, and that's where that came from.
One of the things I like to point out.
That's how deep this shit runs.
One of the things I like to point out to, especially folks on my side of the pond, in our language, and since we've got Kira with us, this is a great connection to this as well. The Inuit people of the north, the Alaska natives, and that they have like 20-some different expressions in their language for snow. In the English language, we have snow. That's it. But in their language, because this is a very important part of their life, they have numerous different expressions that cover the varying manifestations and situations involving snow.
What about the snow outside your house, Swami? What would you call that?
I don't know what to call it, to be quite honest. We got snowed in again here last night, and we're going to carry out that little experiment again later today. But anyway, I just think it's important for people who are English speaking to understand that we don't have the nuances in our language that exist in the original languages. We just don't. And English is unique also, and you just said about the Inuit. There's a complexity of their language where they would have so many words for snow or so many words for the same thing. English is the opposite. We can often have words that can mean several different things. That's why it's so difficult for foreigners to learn English. You can have sight, which is sight with your eyes. You can have site, which is a website, and you can have site, which is a building site. Right. The English is the exact opposite. It actually generates confusion. There's an ambiguity there in the actual definition of terms.
The only language that has silent letters as well.
What's that, Steve? It's
the only language that has silent letters.
Yeah, and we don't have things that like clicks that we used to have in our past. This is really, really deep stuff, and Noam Chomsky's books on linguistics are great for understanding this kind of thing. Another thing too, he's mentioned the Inuit. In Martha Stout's book, The Sociopath Next Door, the term for a psychopath in their language literally translates to a whole long sentence, descriptive sentence. It means something like the men who have sex with our women and steal our stuff, our personal belongings, while we're out hunting to feed our wives and children. That would make perfect sense. Yeah, and so their descriptions of a word are so much more. I don't know what's the word. Colorful and elaborate, but also very specific. So they can say more with less. And they also have, you just remind me of something else I wanted to talk about tonight. Speed reading. I can remember when speed reading was all the rage. They were teaching kids to speed read in school. And they would say things, you got through like 50 pages? You're a genius. But they would never absorb the information that was in there. So you had a generation who were exposed to speed reading who did not understand what the actual book was because they didn't take time to contemplate the sentences. They just read page, da-da-da-da, turn the page over, da-da-da-da, turn the page over. And they would get through a very large book like James Fenimore Cooper's The Leatherstocking, The Last Mohicans, and then you would ask them about it and they would say, it's something about an Indian. But they'd read they had no comprehension of it. And then you'd have to have the cliff notes to tell them what they just read. because they speed read it all the way through it. And this was all the rage in the 60s and the 70s in public school and systems, particularly in the United States, but it made it in other countries too, where your proficiency your literate proficiency was not based according to understanding the conceptual ideas within the text, but it was like the literary version of a premature ejaculation. You just have to get through the book as quickly as possible.
Right. How quick can your eyes touch the letters? That's it.
Spot on. And that was it. And that was your proficiency. And we are so messed with it. It's not funny.
It's a bit like the difference between like going on a journey somewhere and taking it all in, and just going as quickly as you can from A to B.
Yep.
Really fast. Which we're all kind of encouraged to do these days. Be quick, got to get there quickly. We're also pushed for time with everything.
When I was a kid in Ireland, they used to have a thing called the mystery train. I don't know if they had it in England, but you would go down to one of the train stations and you'd buy a ticket for the mystery train, and the mystery train wouldn't tell you where it was going or what was going to happen along the way, and the train company would do this, and you might.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and you would, and it was wonderful. And you might find yourself on a trip to a town you never heard of, and a tour guide would pick you up and show you around things you never heard of.
Wow!
And it wouldn't. And when the train would pull into the town, they would announce on the intercom, "The mystery is now solved." And on the way, you might have entertainers. You might have. It was called the mystery.
Wow!
And
they also had the mystery tours over here. And I had a friend who went to Wales, and he was from Wolverhampton, and the mystery tour was back to Wolverhampton Zoo. He drove by his house, then drove by away again to go back on holiday.
But it's a good thing for us to go on mystery tours in that sense, to put us in places where we're not familiar with the territory, maybe get a bus, or I always remember that scene in that film Trainspotting where they took the train to like a stop in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, and the guy just says, "Now what?" And they didn't know what to do. One guy was saying, "Let's go and explore the hills," but the rest of them was saying, "Fuck that," and they sat down and started drinking, waiting for the train to take them back to Edinburgh. And that was a very powerful statement made in that film.
Yeah. Very deep. Scottish, I think they said.
Yeah, that was the classic sign there. The guy, that was the classic scene in the film where Ewan McGregor goes on the rant, and all they wanted to do was go back, and it showed that's why they were junkies, because that produced an element of the junkie thing was a conformity. Everything in society was conformity. Everything was adapting to the same thing, and I think we need that shit back. That kind of idea of mystery in our lives. We have to, like I always say, when you wake up, your life should be seen the way a poet would see the world. And wonder what, and that's how we should live our lives.
There's so little depth to anything. It's just add water, stir, drive through, crap.
Yeah, don't give me the map. Give me a blank sheet of paper and a pen, and I'll explore the territory for myself and draw my own map. And I think that's the way I've been trying to see things and live things, and I think it's good because it deprograms you of so many things, but it also allows you to understand who you are. Your focuses may be like, for instance, it's probably not a good idea if the only things you can remember from the territory are where the pubs are, or where the churches are. But if you can, then you start to become aware of many things. Then you start to fill it in, and you create a territory of your own life. Now, listen, I can't believe how fast this show has gone tonight. Jesus Christ, it's almost over. I just got the 90-second cue. Thanks, Steve, for all the songs. They were brilliant. We had a full house here tonight. Steve, Fi, Nick, Swami, and Kira for calling in. And that's I think tonight was a good show. We've actually opened up a whole new way of looking at things. If people want to contact me or think more about these ideas, about language, because we're awake now, we know the way forward, we know how the system is run, we know psychopaths run it. instead of being locked in stage 2 of the control grid where we're in this place, maybe now it's time to start developing new rules, not rules, but new conventions and new languages and science for us to actually become not only the new natives, but a new natives with our own language and our own way of seeing things, our own way of doing things. And then from that, we can probably change this whole reality going forward from ourselves, expanding outwards, because it's all to play for, and their rules don't work, and our rules, we can make rules that work for us. So thanks everybody again. Thanks for tuning in. This is The Velocity Now, Thomas Sheridan, thomassheridanarts.com on the Type 1 Radio Network, and I'll see us all next week, and take care.